Good afternoon, everyone. I imagine that you, like me, this morning started your day by going to your closet or to your dresser to pick out what you would wear. It's an important decision to choose how we will look. Beyond that, going to the store to pick out clothes can be a lot of fun. Picking things for style and fit, cost, and color helps us display our identity to the world. Gives people a sense of who we are. Look your best, feel your best, it is often said. But there's a lot more to clothes shopping than just picking out what might fit best or feel best. The apparel industry has long been fraught with labor abuses and problems. For those of us who are concerned about the plight of workers around the world, ensuring that a more just supply chain exists in our clothes shopping experience is a very important consideration. As part of the Presbyterian Hunger Program, Enough for Everyone has ought to better understand how what we buy shapes the world's economic realities. Enough for everyone in all places, in all ways. It encourages us to employ different justice-based economic models. This means that we promote fair trade, invite people to consider green purchasing, and advocate for micro-lending and micro-enterprise that helps the developing world receive a more just economic future. And we invite Christians to see that every dollar that we spend is actually an invitation to relationship. As part of this work, we've become more and more interested in the idea of what it means to be a Christian in the marketplace. Global economic forces encourage us to see ourselves as merely consumers. It gives us a title and a name based on what we do within the market, that we buy, that we use the things that the world makes. But for us as Christians, we recognize that our identity is already claimed, that we are named by other forces and in other ways. So being a Christian in the marketplace encourages us to see and shape our behaviors in a different way. So how do we do this? The first thing we do is encourage Christians to consider what it is that they see. Global economic forces seek to keep us disconnected. They keep us from seeing one another at each step along a supply chain. These long supply chains can be difficult and heady things to navigate. So it's important for us to evaluate each step of the process to make sure that justice is being done in each and every step along the way. It also rests on a few other principles. First of all, we want to consider lightening our impact. The earth only has limited resources, and we want to ensure that they will last for others in the future. By buying greener products, we ensure that our impact is lessened and that there will truly be enough for everyone. We encourage people to deepen their local connections. Shopping locally and connecting with local artisans draws us into a tighter circle and helps us to see those who make and sell the things that we buy. We reach back through the supply chain, seeing each step along the way and encouraging fairness in each one of those steps. And we reach out in our communities, encouraging one another to share and supporting one another in ethical consumption and ethical consumer behaviors. Today's webinar is primarily about reaching back through the supply chain, which can be a difficult process to help us to make sure that we can see what needs to be seen. So why do we care about labor and about the steps along the supply chain? The Bible has a lot to say about labor and economic forces. Listen to the words of the Apostle James. Listen, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you have kept back by fraud, cry out. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. And then from the prophet Amos, thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Judah and for 4 I will not revoke the punishment, because they have rejected the law of the Lord and have not kept his statutes. But they have been led astray by the same lies after which their ancestors walked. So I will send a fire on Judah, and it shall devour the strongholds of Jerusalem. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4 I will not revoke the punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals. They who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth, and push the afflicted out of the way. For these reasons, we're very concerned about the pay and treatment of the workers in the systems that we are part of. Each and every dollar, as I've said before, is an invitation to form relationship across the supply chain. The people who make our clothes literally embrace us each and every morning when we choose what we put on to our bodies. For this reason, it's important to us to consider how they are treated, how they are paid, and that they receive enough to sustain their lives. It's an important principle and way that we ensure that there is enough for everyone. And now I'd like to turn things over to Bjorn Clausen from the International Labor Rights Forum, who will help us to better understand some of the abuses that occur in the apparel industry as we know it now.
Okay, thank you, Bryce. Can you see my screen at this point? I just wanted to double check.
Yes, we can.
Okay, terrific. So thank you so much for inviting International Labor Rights Forum to do this presentation today. We've worked for many years with the Presbyterian Hunger Program and are very, very pleased to continue and deepen this working relationship. The International Labor Rights Forum is a nearly 30-year-old international human rights organization that advocates for the rights of workers globally, including those workers in light industries such as apparel and electronics, and also agricultural workers around the world. And I work as a policy analyst and a researcher with the International Labor Rights Forum, which is based in Washington, D.C. Okay, let me see. There we go. So here you see the different parts of the presentation today. Corporate accountability, a voice for workers, consumer solidarity. These describe a triangle of strategies and actions that ILRF use in a variety of campaigns, in a variety of contexts to address a variety of needs. And in this case, I'm going to talk about these strategies in the context of global apparel workers, and particularly the workers in Bangladesh. We've been focusing a lot of our attention on Bangladesh lately, both because it's a situation that, as many of you know, cries out for need, but it's also a place where some new innovative things are happening to make these factories safer in Bangladesh. So first, holding corporations accountable. You probably recognize this image. On April 24th, 2013, almost 2 years ago at this point, the Rana Plaza building collapsed in Bangladesh, and at least 1,138 workers were crushed to death. This collapse has become sort of the poster child of the bankruptcy of the corporate voluntary system for social responsibility. This is a system that has failed, first because the voluntary codes and audits have not protected workers. In this case, in the Rana Plaza case, as in many, many other cases, Western brands and retailers had audited the Rana Plaza factories and certified them to be compliant with labor rights and safety standards. And the system has also failed because workers, as they tell us over and over again, are silenced, excluded, and ignored. In the case of Rana Plaza, workers told the factories the day before it collapsed that they had seen substantial cracks in the walls, in the columns. They didn't want to go to work the following day because they feared that something bad would happen. The factories forced them to return to work. under the threat of losing a day's pay, which nobody can afford in Bangladesh. They had no voice. They had to return to work, and more than 1,100 workers were crushed to their death. So the first step in being accountable, we believe, is acknowledging fault and paying compensation to those that you have wronged. I am sorry that my slideshows are sort of taking care of itself here, but I'll try to keep track of it. At least 29 global brands had recent or current orders with at least one of the 5 garment factories in the Rana Plaza building. So each one of those brands were complicit in the collapse. But just half of the companies who were connected to the factories in the building have made any kind of contributions to the victims and to the families of the victims of the collapse. And nearly all of those companies that did make contributions actually have failed to make a significant enough contribution. And we're calling on them to increase their donations to the Rana Plaza Compensation Fund immediately. I'll come back to this at the very end when we talk about what everybody can do. The second step in being accountable as a corporation is to take responsibility for working conditions in your supply chain through, I apologize, this shouldn't happen, but I'll keep track of my slides here. So take responsibility for conditions in your supply chain through legally binding standards, not voluntary commitments that can be broken on a whim and without consequences, which is the case when a company adopts a code of conduct, for example. So this is why the ILRF worked together with allied organizations worldwide to create the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh, and why we are a witness signatory to this agreement. This is a unique step forward in terms of international corporate accountability. It's a legally binding agreement to make factories safe between companies and the unions in Bangladesh. So the unions have a path to legal remedy through this agreement. If companies choose not to comply, they can be held accountable. In a publication called Dangerous Silence, which we put out last year around this time, ILRF reported that the U.S. military exchanges, which are retail stores located on military installations globally that operate under the authority of the U.S. Department of Defense, actually use some of the same unsafe and illegal factories in Bangladesh as the private brands and retailers. The U.S. military exchanges say that they rely on the industry's audits to ensure worker safety and do not take action independently, either to investigate or to remedy the safety violations. So we say that these exchanges are in fact flying blind when it comes to working conditions in the supply chain, and we have called upon these exchanges to also join the accord. Going on to the second part here, from corporate accountability to strengthening workers' voices. Of course, one of the most pernicious underlying causes of the dangerous conditions in Bangladesh and elsewhere are the multiple ways in which workers are silenced and denied a voice in terms of their working conditions and their own safety. Bangladeshi union organizers report that they routinely experience threats by management soon after unions are organized, and often before they can even register. Aminul Islam was a union organizer and a friend of ILRF. He had been detained multiple times by security forces, beaten, falsely accused of crimes he did not commit, and falsely imprisoned, and he was tortured many times in prison. Now, nearly 3 years ago, he was tortured and killed, and nobody has been held accountable. Many workers have told us about goons, they call them, local gang members that are actually hired by factories to squelch any kind of organizing activity, any attempt to form unions in a factory by violence or the threats of violence. And here you say, this is the worker we interviewed who says that these goons actually come inside the factory, roaming, listening to who is saying what. They're local gang members, and they instill fear in workers. He went on to say that they keep track of everything that he does inside of the factory to such an extent that he compared it to, well, what it says, similar to when a guy is born, from then until the end, there's a record with Allah. How many sins he committed, there's a report with Allah. Now, the factory made a system like that. They have a personal guy. Maybe I don't know that guy. I don't know who will snitch on me, when or how. Nearly all workers we talk to say that they keep silent, they don't protest, they don't try to organize out of fear of losing their jobs. And finally, gender-based violence, both at work and at home, has reached nearly epidemic levels in Bangladesh. And nevertheless, it is a hidden epidemic, and workers rarely talk about it. We were able to talk to many, many women workers who have told us about stories about sexual harassment, threats of violence they face as women, and being denigrated as a woman in a patriarchal society. So corporate accountability, a voice for workers, the next vital step, and this is where we come in, is consumer solidarity. But I want to talk about consumer solidarity perhaps in a different sense that we normally talk about it. I would talk about it in a broad sense about the economic tools that we can use to defend labor rights, apologize again, that we can use to defend labor rights not just as individual consumers, but as taxpayers and as citizens of cities, states, and the country, the United States. So one example of that is using trade as a lever for worker justice. And after many years of petitions, the Obama administration finally suspended trade benefits for Bangladesh under the generalized system of trade preferences just after the Rana Plaza disaster, a move that seemed to have some immediate positive effects actually as the government of Bangladesh immediately moved to recognize more unions. Government purchasing is big business everywhere and another potent lever to defend labor rights. Listen to these figures. In the United States, state, local, and federal government agencies spend a combined $2 trillion on goods, services, and public works projects. This amounts to 12% of our gross domestic product. The federal government spends about a third of that, and state and local governments 2/3. And the U.S. federal government is the world's largest consumer, spending between $350 and $500 billion on goods and services each year. And U.S. is not alone in being a big government spender in terms of on goods and services. It's roughly the same figures in EU and in OECD countries, where in OECD countries, on average, we spend 15 to 25% of our GDP on procurement, government procurement. So government purchasing is a huge business. However, it's a business that all too often puts workers' rights and safety at risk. And LRF has done a number of studies on worker rights in the supply chains of apparel companies that make uniforms and other products for U.S. state, local, and federal agencies. And we've found, and here you see some of those publications in some of the countries that we have researched. We've seen poverty wages only enough to cover a fraction of a family's basic needs. Excessive production quotas resulting in 12-hour days, mandatory pregnancy tests, and unhealthy work environments, lack of safety, of course, including risk of fire and building collapses, and severe repression of union supporters. So on the positive side, in the United States, state and local government agencies have pioneered new policies and practices to protect workers' rights in their contractor supply chains since the late 1990s. This sweat-free movement began, I think, in 1998 when North Olmsted, a suburb of Cleveland, declared it would no longer purchase uniforms made in sweatshop conditions. This movement is still going, And the latest city to join the sweat-free ranks is the city of Chicago, bringing the overall total to 192 state and local government agencies. Some U.S. public agencies have taken a further step, pioneering really the sharing of supply chain data amongst themselves. The Sweat-Free Link-Up that you see here is a publicly accessible database of factories and other suppliers that make uniforms and other apparel for public agencies. So this is a tool that promotes increased transparency and labor rights accountability in the industries. Cities such as Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Milwaukee, among others, require that apparel bidders and contractors disclose the factories where their products are made and then share that information with the Sweat-Free Purchasing Consortium, which is a collaborative effort of states and local governments to promote apparel that's made in good working conditions. So this is basically what the database looks like if you look it up online. Here, and I apologize if this is somewhat of a technical slide, but this is an example of a city acting as a laboratory of democracy, in this case the city of Madison, Wisconsin, which has developed a cooperative contract that requires transparency, real detailed compliance plans from their contractors, and independent oversight. It's really a new step forward in contractor accountability. The exciting thing about this contract is that it allows other state and local government agencies in the United States to purchase uniforms under the same terms and conditions for the lifetime of the contract. And so it means that there are some 90,000 public agencies in the U.S. that can use this contract that Madison has created to obtain uniforms for its own public employees. That means, I'll keep it very short, just look at the step 3 here. Step 3 is contract performance. One requirement of the contractor is that they actually pay rebates to the city to help fund independent investigations of their supply chain. Those rebates are up to 3% of the contract value. So the larger the contract amount becomes, the more cities and public agencies that use this contract, the more resources there will be to actually investigate the supply chains through an independent monitor and intervene and improve conditions as needed. So I think we're going to the taking action stage here. I've run through these slides pretty quickly and I'm happy to take questions at the end, but here is taking action. What can you do? You can do a lot in terms of helping to hold corporations accountable for the safety and labor rights violations in Bangladesh and in other places. ILRF is focusing right now on making sure that companies that are complicit in the Rana Plaza collapse acknowledge their responsibility and pay compensation to the victims. We're focusing on 2 companies strategically. One is a children's place and the other one is Walmart. Together with other organizations, we've created special websites where you can go to get information about the actions that you can take and petitions that you can sign. For children's place, it's called orphansplace.com, and for Walmart, it's called walmartdeathtraps.com. And if you go to the third website I've got listed here, laborrights.org/action-center-20, I'm sorry, it should be 2014, not 204, 2014. There are some other actions that you can also look at. So this is how to hold companies immediately accountable for wrongs in which they are complicit. If you want to think longer term and help to create a big market for good working conditions in global supply chains, a very simple thing you can do actually is to go to your city or any kind of public agency that is in your immediate community, any public agency that buys uniforms for public employees, that is, or maybe even buys T-shirts, and ask them to use the Madison contract. So the Madison contract in this case it's not easy to understand for people who don't know procurement, but the Madison contract, you can picture, is sort of like a store that they have created, that they allow other cities to go into that store and buy out of that store. And when they do so, as I said, there will be more companies that are accountable, and we'll have more resources actually to investigate supply chains. So that's a simple thing you can do. And the other thing you can do, of course, is start the sweat-free campaign and to encourage other cities actually to adopt policies that say we will no longer buy products that are made in bad working conditions. Instead, we will use the leverage that we have as a government purchaser to support workers worldwide. And you can also then encourage them to join together with other cities so they share resources, they coordinate actions through the Sweat-Free Purchasing Consortium. And you can find materials for this kind of action at sweatfree.org. And I think that's it. This is how to contact us. My email is down at the bottom there. And I am happy to take questions and to have discussion. Thank you so much.
Bjorn, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yes.
We do have a few questions. I'm not sure the best one to start with, but can you maybe say more about the rebates in the Madison contract that you mentioned? The question is sort of about what is the incentive for the companies to agree to that rebate that you talked about coming back to the company as, or coming back to the city as ways of investigating the factories?
Sure. What is the incentive? Well, the incentive is simply that it is part of the contract conditions. A company knows, actually company knew before they bid on that contract that were they to win the contract, that is one of the contract conditions, that they pay, once the contract reaches a volume of a certain amount, they pay 3% of that contract amount back to the city. So, so basically $3 on every $100 of contract of what the city owns, they get back. So, the company knew that from the beginning. They knew that in order to get the contract, they had to agree to that. They may be building that into the cost, in which case Madison has made a decision that this is worth it for us. We need to be able to have some kind of independent oversight. But that's basically it's a requirement. There's no incentive really needed.
Okay.
Well, I guess the incentive is that the promise of a large contract that they can fulfill.
Okay. We have another question about, can you say more about the reference you made to trade privileges being suspended? Are those, like, how long, or is it conditional, and can you say more about what those conditions are?
Sure. Actually, the conditions are spelled out quite clearly by the U.S. Trade Representative Office. I think you can, I don't have all the conditions on the top of my head right now, but you can Google USTR and Bangladesh GSP. GSP stands for Generalized System of Trade Preferences, to get all the details. But basically, the GSP program is conditional on countries maintaining respect for a set of core labor standards that are defined by the International Labor Organizations. And those core labor standards are maintaining freedom of association and collective bargaining, non-discrimination in employment and in the course of work, no forced labor, and no child labor. So those four sets of rights, freedom of association, collective bargaining, non-discrimination, no forced labor, no child labor, and the USTR what had happened in this case is that I believe since 2006 the AFL-CIO, the Trade Union Federation, had a petition to USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative Office, to suspend GSP benefits for Bangladesh because they were in such flagrant violation of these core labor rights. they are in blatant violation of the freedom of association and collective bargaining rights. Their laws don't meet ILO standards, and they don't, of course, enforce the laws that they have on the books. And so that is one of the conditions that the USTR has set, and it's not they didn't revoke it indefinitely, they suspended it. So there is an opportunity for Bangladesh to regain trade benefits under GSP.
Okay. It looks like I have two more questions, and I'm not sure. They kind of go together, so you can sort of speak to whichever one you prefer. But so one question is, should we stop buying products made in Bangladesh, or what will keep corporations from moving production from Bangladesh if, this pressure is put on those corporations?
Mm-hmm. That was one question, or that was two questions?
It was...
That was both those questions. Okay, got it. Yeah. No. Our goal is not to stop buying from Bangladesh. In fact, when we created the Accord, and of course ILRF was one of the many partners in helping to develop this fire safety and building fire safety agreement, companies that join the Accord are required to maintain the same or greater production levels in most of the factories that they use, in their main suppliers in Bangladesh, for at least 2 years, as long as those factories are, as long as that's commercially viable for them, and as long as the factories maintain code compliance or compliance with the terms of the Accord. This was a very, very important point. The fact, in order to create a safe industry in Bangladesh, in order to create dignified working conditions where factories actually comply with all the labor rights and human rights, the factories themselves need to have the capacity to comply. And they often don't have that capacity because the prices that they receive from the companies is too low. They can't afford to comply. Because the orders that they get are too unreliable. They can't plan into their future. Because the orders can change at a whim at the last minute, and so they have to force workers to work overtime in order to make accommodate changes in the orders. So one of our key demands is stable, long-term orders that are with adequate prices. We do not at all advocate for a boycott. We do not at all advocate for companies to withdraw from Bangladesh. And we advocate for workers to stay there and maintain and take responsibility for making the factories safe. And you would hear, if you talk to workers in Bangladesh, if you talk to the trade unions in Bangladesh, you'd hear them being very adamant on that point as well.
Thank you. I think we have one more question about how many companies have currently signed on to the Accord.
I don't have the precise number, but it is over 190.
Okay.
Again, it's over the. You can look up the Accord website. They have everybody who is a signatory to the Accord on their website.
Okay. I think that does it for the questions for now. So we will hand it back to Bryce, unless there's anything else that you would like to add, Bjorn.
No, that's good to hand back to Bryce. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah, we will maybe review the actions at the end, what people can do.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Definitely. Thank you, Bjorn. For many of us, we don't have the opportunity to think a lot about the things that we buy. But as we try more and more to create more and more justice in, excuse me, I'm Is my screen showing? There we go. As we work to create more and more justice in our supply chains, it becomes more and more important that we know what's going on. In addition to the actions that you've heard so far, there are places that you can find more information or find opportunities to buy from reliable sources. First of all, you can visit our website at pcusa.org/enough to find out more about just purchasing options as well as alternative systems that you can engage so that workers are treated fairly and that there truly will be enough for everyone. You can also Google the PCUSA Just Purchasing Guide, which has options for buying all kinds of items that are either American-made or made from reliable sources. To find out more about the apparel industry and to find out about transparency within different brands, you can visit freetowork.org, and there's an apparel industry trends from 2012 that helps you to see among brands who you can actually see what's going on throughout their supply chain. It also might be of interest to you to look up Sabbath economics, where Ched Myers and the Bartimaeus Institute advocate for all different ways to shape our economic lives to see that our Christian discipleship and principles are being lived out in our day-to-day lives and in the way that we spend money. Again, as we consider what we buy and what we wear, it's important for us to consider what we see. To see all of the steps along a global supply chain is an important way that we can witness to our principles and our ethics in a robust way. We want to consider lightening our impact, buying less to be less of a strain on the environment. Consider deepening our local connections to both producers and retailers. Reach back through the supply chains. As we have seen today, it's so important to consider how workers are treated in our purchasing decisions, and to reach out in our community so that we share with those whom we know and can support one another as we seek to form more ethical and justice-based supply chains. Now we want to toss it back over to the actions that Bjorn has shown us.
Okay. Okay. Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Okay, well, great. So just to remind people about the actions, you know, one thing I want to say, what Bryce has been talking about, the idea of actually coming to know the workers, and that's a transformative experience for anybody. So, you know, whenever, you know, we often organize worker tours, for example, and it's a chance for you to go and meet with the workers who actually maybe lived through disasters or have taken action to improve conditions in the workplace or have organized unions. Their stories are so inspiring. I really encourage you to take advantage of the opportunities to meet with workers whenever you can. And I know that Bryce and Jessica are soon going to be going to Bangladesh and will bring back worker stories, and I really encourage you to avail yourself of the materials that they're going to be sharing. So again, I think that we make a difference when we take action, whatever we do. Go to orphansplace.com, sign a petition, find out how other store actions you can take. If you happen to live close to New York City, that is, in okay, I'm going to mispronounce the name of this town again, but Secaucus, that's it, right? Secaucus happens to be the headquarters city of the Children's Place. This Thursday at 9 a.m. there will be an action at the headquarters of the Children's Place in Secaucus in New Jersey. If you're anywhere near or know people near it, please consider being there. And you can get information after this webinar about what's going to happen there and how to get there. Again, if people want to be active in the sweat-free movement, please do send me an email. We can talk about it. Again, my email is bjorn@ilrf.org. It's a great way to build demand for good working conditions in supply chain that is a lasting demand and that can help to create sustainably good working conditions in supply chain.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, and I don't see any new questions, but I would encourage everyone, if you've been on this webinar or are viewing it on YouTube, to consider taking action through those mentioned by Bjorn, or keep connected to the Presbyterian Hunger Program through either our website or our Facebook page. And we will keep you up to date on actions and things that come up as Jessica and I go on this delegation to Bangladesh and connect Presbyterians to more opportunities to take action.